Hi. Welcome, everyone. Wow, we're at the end of a long day. Thank you for sticking with us. My name is Ashleigh, and yeah, we're gonna have a really casual chat. But we figured we'd start with just introductions and context as to who we are. My name is Ashleigh. You can use she or they pronouns for me. I'm originally from Hartford, from the North End. Anybody else from the North End here? Hey. Yeah, but I've been living in Brooklyn for almost 12 years now, but I come back to Hartford often. My family's still here. If you hear a baby screaming in the back, that is my nibbling, Oakland. But yeah, I've been doing cooperative development work in Brooklyn for like 7 years now, 7, 8 years. So it's really cool to be able to come home and like have this connection between home and both of my homes, like where I'm from and where I live. Yeah, Steph and I know each other because we work on a project together that we call the Central Brooklyn Food Democracy Project. And it's a lot of words, but essentially what we're doing is building an ecosystem in Central Brooklyn, in Black Brooklyn, which we also like to refer to it as, of people who work in the food industry, that are workers, that are consumers, and we're really trying to create a model where folks are owning the local food system. A lot of that is in response to gentrification. It's in response to exploitation that happens in the food system, especially for Black and brown folks. And so what we're building is a network of worker-owned businesses, which Steph is a member of and we'll talk more about, and a consumer co-op that are all Black-led, where we are committed to doing business with each other and keeping money within the community. And so my role in that is I help incubate and launch worker-owned businesses, and I'm helping with the organizing of the Central Brooklyn Food Co-op, which is a 100% member-owned grocery store.
There we go. Hey, y'all. Hey, friends. A lot of friends out here. Um, I'm Steph. I am a founder of Brooklyn Packers. We are a worker owned cooperative that does food distribution in Bed-Stuy, New York, specifically. We do large food aggregation in Brooklyn, like pallets of food to organizations, nonprofits, etc. And then we have a consumer facing brand called Brooklyn Supported Agriculture that you can go online and order groceries and have them delivered to your home or pick up in a central location that is near your home. And then we also have a delivery service that we just deliver things from point A to point B. And we do some other things.
Oh, okay. So we're gonna hop right into it. Steph and I talk about a lot of this stuff all the time. So it's really just a conversation. Friends, we've known each other for almost a decade now. Um, yeah, and it feels like more than a work relationship. We see each other all the time. And we're often talking about co-ops, and I think for both of us, it's not just like a job. I think it's like how we move through the world. We like definitely believe in cooperation. We believe in collaboration. We love collectives. And so we drafted some questions that we'll be asking each other back and forth. And the first one we'll both kind of respond to, but the question is why co-ops and why co-ops for Black people?
Well, I think it was said earlier, like, I think Anna Martina, you were saying that um, this is like work that we do. We do this already, just as human beings. Like in different cultures, we will, be sending money back home. We'll be working together to make something happen at home. We do this stuff all the time. We just don't call it anything. So I think it's just a natural function of who we are as people, to help each other. We're highly social, you know, creatures. We want to be helping each other in most ways for survival. And so why don't we do that in the context of like how we work together? I think that we have to figure out how to do that better all the time. And this work is highly relational, and so we have to figure some things out around that. But I think that's what brings us back to it all the time. That's what brings me back to it all the time. This is why I believe in co-op as life. It's not just business, and it's definitely not just business as usual. It's just, I think, how we need to be to actually save our relationships and save the earth. I think that's actually the stakes that we're talking about.
Testing, yes. Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah, for me, I would say so. Ooh, yeah, I think why co-ops and why for Black folks specifically. I was at a conference, a specifically like Black co-op conference in June, and one of the speakers, we were talking about a lot of the challenges with co-ops because there are a lot of challenges, as you can imagine. Think about like group work, but applying that to life, like all of the things you hate about group work, but like that is, yeah, that's like co-ops times 10. And specifically for Black folks, we were talking a lot about like trust, and someone said like, yeah, we went from being the property and being the capital to like shifting to like trying to own capital, and think about all of the trauma and the pain and the healing that has to come along with that. And that's something that I've just been sitting with as someone who's doing work specifically organizing with Black folks around starting co-ops, asking Black folks to trust other people with their money, with decision making, with power. And there's so much that comes up, and there's so much around trust, and there's so much not just around like trusting other people, but like around trusting yourself. And in co-op development, there's this term called like the ownership gap, where people really struggle with seeing themselves as owners, and kind of in this position of like are used to being in this position of like being told what to do, being delegated what to do, and like there's a learning curve around that to like see yourself as like an owner. And so I think it's so important for Black folks, especially, to like not only see ourselves as owners. I think there's like cooperatives in the business sense, in terms of like how you run a business, but so much of these practices are also ancestral for us. So many of these practices are the ways that like we've actually survived. And there's this book, Collective Courage, which a lot of you are co-op nerds, so I know, yeah, a lot of you have heard of this book. And yeah, for enslaved Black folks here in this country, some of the first ways that people demonstrated cooperative economics were if folks were freed, they would pool their money and resources together to buy the freedom of other Black folks. And so like literally solidarity economies and cooperativism, whether it's like big C co-ops or just the ways that we take care of each other, are the ways that we have always existed as folks who come from indigenous cultures where we are collective, like we care for each other, we're collective based, and capitalism isolates us and wants us to think that everything is our fault, that it's poor people's fault that they're poor. And so for me, co-ops are like that feeling of like, oh, you don't have to do this alone. It's like not your fault. And just like hearing that and feeling that and like being in a practice of that is like actually healing and liberating. And so for me, I think that's like super important for Black folks who are shifting, who are carrying this legacy from like being the capital, being the property, to actually like being owners, and like owning your own labor is actually super powerful. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In the context of, because you helped develop co-ops, but also you developed a co-op, and I develop co-ops ecosystem-wise, and I own a co-op. Like, what, in your experience, in those contexts, are tangible to you? Like, what's tangible and what's like pie in the sky?
Like the vision? Ooh, yeah. Tangible. I think tangible is like living wage, like having a living wage and people working and making money that they can actually survive on and thrive on. I think, yeah, people are hustlers. Like black folks are hustlers. People always have side gigs, at least one, two, three, four, five jobs, and then always ideas. And I think it is tangible for us to like share that and invest in that in each other. And I think minimally we should be able to do that. We should have the resources to do that. Um, I also like come from a organizing lineage of like transformative justice, and I am like abolitionist in a lot of my practices. And I'm like most of the time like fuck it, burn it all down. But I think that cooperatives are like actually a tool for like what do we put in place. Like we often in radical spaces are like, we don't need the cops, we don't need this, but like oftentimes you're like, okay, but what is the alternative? And for me, being someone who has like operated in a lot of those spaces and had a lot of those sentiments of like, we don't need the police, we don't need all of those things, but like what is the alternative? I think, what does it mean for us to like actually really trust in each other, to take care of each other, whether it's like thinking about childcare collectives or thinking about like when someone causes harm in a community, like not asking an outsider to come in and rectify the situation, but like having the skills and the tools internally to do that. And so I think it's like, what are the ways that we can care for each other on all of the levels, not just when it comes to like making money in terms of a business, but like when it literally comes to like all of the pieces of our life. So it's like, yeah, living on the land, living free, I think land-based, we all want to live on a commune. We all want to like grow our own food, have the babies running like butt naked in the wildflowers. When I think of like, yeah, the dream, I think it's like freedom, like what freedom feels like on all of those levels. Yeah. What about for you? What is like the dream, the vision? I know you have a lot of ideas.
Well, like I think the tangible part is like I get to be a part of like a business that runs and we make money, and we figured that out over the last almost 9 years, and we've been through a lot of learning and a lot of mistakes. I do have two family members in my co-op, which adds a level of complexity to it sometimes, and then and different levels of expertise within the co-op itself. Um, but like the ability to own our own labor and like start from, not knowing really what we were doing to like, I think we know what we're doing now, which feels really good. To get to a point where we can pay ourselves after not being able to pay ourselves pretty much until the pandemic. So that became like, oh, I think we're onto something, and we also figured out what our work was. So that feels real to me. The dream is to co-opt the hell out of everything, because I don't think that you can co-op one part of life and not co-op another part of life and it work well. It's like you can live in a housing cooperative, but then you have to shop at a regular grocery store, which the prices are crazy, But if we own our own housing and we own our own food sources, we own our own transportation, we have control of our own health care, the basic necessities of life, like that makes sense, because we're not going outside of our own means to get the things that we really need. We're still dependent on a system that wants to return us back to slavery, like all the time. They're always trying to figure out, how can we pay you less? What is that Chris Rock joke where he's like, minimum wage is just saying, I will pay you less, but it's illegal. So how do we get ourselves out of that? How do we set the conditions for us to not have to rely on somebody else's wants and needs? We're literally, if you're not working for yourself in some way and you're not part of like the food chain, or you're literally working for like 1% of the population, at the end of the day. So like, how do we get ourselves out of that? And it's not short work. Like, this is long work. I fully don't expect this work to happen in my lifetime, for real. But like, how do we build upon the folks that came before us and know that we're not going to be the last? This is one thing that is from the fellowship. You know, we talk a lot about, like, we're not the first and we're not the last. And if we're not the first, we're not the last, what are we building? And you know, what are we showing the folks that are coming after us? And how do we make it sustainable for everybody to live? Because literally the earth is counting on us. Like, the extractors are going to keep on extracting until we stop them.
Yeah, and actually, I thought of another example of the tangible. So in 2020, when lockdown hit, and do y'all remember the like supply chain issues where it was like hard to get like bread, where it was hard to get, you could go to the grocery store and it was like the shelves were bare. And so one of the things that happened in New York City is, I know Brooklyn Packers, being a distribution co-op, they have relationships with farms that are close by. They have relationships with local businesses. And so what happened was they mobilized and they were like, oh, you know, actually there's like, you can get produce from really close by. And so there was a lot of mobilization in terms of mutual aid organizations and mutual aid groups that band together, and Brooklyn Packers really created this huge hub across Brooklyn of figuring out how to get folks groceries from farms upstate. Also, you know, farms are having a hard time figuring out how to get their stuff to places as well, where people really like pulled together and took care of each other. And it's in those moments of crises, right, where you realize that like the things that we need, we actually rely on each other. So in Brooklyn, it was like actually organizers, it was like small businesses, people who had the relationships with local businesses, with local farms, who actually figured out how to feed people, where all of these other like big grocery stores, large institutions like didn't know what to do. Like folks fed each other, took care of each other. I know a lot of, raise your hand if you like did some sort of bartering with people, did some sort of like care work during the pandemic. Like we all know what that was like because you had to. Like the systems failed us and we relied on things that we had to do and the relationships that we already had to take care of each other. And so when we think of the tangible, we do these things all the time. We do them every day. And we might not think about it as like us participating in a solidarity economy, but anytime you trade or barter labor or a favor, you do a favor and someone cashes in on that favor later, like all of that is part of the solidarity economy. And so thinking about what are the ways that we can do that more, what are the ways that we can do that with intention and with care, we're already doing a lot of it. So I think it's like that remembering as well.
Yeah, and like, I think it's important to know in our food system, like in the city, you know, we rely heavily on food from other places outside of the city almost exclusively. It's like we have to really think about our food system as well as our cooperative system as an ecosystem. Like, we rely on each other to get what we need. And the food system is extractive, so we have to figure out like what is the best way and the cheapest way to get things from point A to point B. How do we support our farmers in a way that is sustainable, because farming is really hard. I know some farmers in here, and yeah, it's an incredibly hard job to do. And so if we're not building ecosystems, then we're not really building the conditions for things to survive past a certain point. So we really have to think about the neighborhood, like Johan said, the neighborhood. Like my partner says, what's the village? Like, how are we really supporting each other in real time, in small ways, but also in larger ways? And how do we plan for the inevitability for things to collapse? And I think that's what the pandemic showed us. Like, we can do this, we have done it, and how do we make it happen when we're not in crisis?
Okay, so we're clearly fans of co-ops. Steph wants to co-op everything, and also there are some real challenges. And so we want to talk about that too. So the next thing we want to talk about are what do we see as some of the biggest challenges and roadblocks to like this vision that we have, this like future that we really want to envision and bring alive? What are some of the challenges and roadblocks that you've experienced?
Humans, human beings, us collectively, we get in our own ways, and we're not honest with ourselves and with others about what we want, what's the reality, what we expected, and the reconciling those things is tough. It's hard for everybody. We romanticize things, co-ops. Sometimes we think it's going to be a one way, and we're like, oh, wait a minute, this is harder. You mean we have to talk to each other? Oh, you mean we have to? We're going to disagree? Oh, there's conflict. Wait a minute, I gotta go in my corner because I can't handle it. But I think if we are able to embed some sort of like conflict, evolution in the beginnings of our organizations, then I think we have a better chance of getting through the hard times, because there are going to be hard times. It's inevitable. There's going to be conflict. Ashleigh has a special role because Ashleigh actually does the conflict evolution for my co-op. So she gets to hear all the things. And, sometimes it's hard to hear, like, I'm wrong. Or maybe you should think about this in a different way. Or that's not what you said. Or, those are tough things. But then I'm like, you're right. That's the way, that is the truth. So it's really important. I mean, I can't even stress it enough how important it is from the beginning. Embed it from the beginning. Like, it's going to happen. It can, and it has destroyed organizations, and it will again. And then also knowing that maybe you're not ready, and it's okay. Like maybe your co-op is not ready. Maybe it's not the time, and it's okay. We go back to the lab and we try again, and choose your business partners. That's important.
Yeah, the relationships piece is big. Yeah. so much conflict. We also live in a culture of like conflict avoidance, or where we feel like conflict is bad, and so a lot of our work is helping to be like, conflict is going to happen, right? And people are like, yes, it's fine, whatever. Yeah, or they're like, it won't happen. We love each other. We'll agree. And I think people are like really focused on like building consensus, and then like as you get deeper into it, like people are like, you have a feeling something's going on, but people like are embarrassed to like say something's going on, and so you're like, okay, or it's like not that big of a deal. They like figured it out. Maybe someone like just like gave in, but then like resentment builds, and then there's like a period of time when you're like, all right, there's one little thing happens, and then there's like all this other stuff comes out, and you're like, all right, actually we're holding on to that. And so I think just the skills and the tools, which are life skills, right? Not just in like a business, but with anything. Like, how do we also look at ourselves and the ways that we are in conflict, and also the ways that we perpetuate that within spaces. I think another real challenge is like access to resources. So we, like, the work that I do is like really specific about like building cooperatives with and for Black people and Black communities, and Black folks don't get loans easily. There's like this thing called structural racism, and so we can want to co-op, and we can want to like work together and be committed to that all that we can, and then there's also like real limiting factors that are institutional, and so I think that there's like not just this push to like tell people to cooperativize, but also like a push for everyone, whether you're in a co-op or not, of like, how are we creating the conditions that support these co-ops? Are we shopping at co-ops? Is there like legislation that is like supporting co-ops? If we work in a place where we can move funds or resources, are we doing that to co-ops in a way that's also not asking them to bend over backwards or like do a lot of reporting? Like, what are all the ways that we support this that aren't just like, oh, work together and like do all this healing and create all of this like justice within a system that is like really, really violent towards Black people building power? When we think about examples over time, like the Black Panthers, so much of what they did was collectivism. So much of it was like taking care of each other, and what we know and like what we hear about the Black Panthers, so much of it is like tainted by this really judgmental view of like them being like militant and dangerous terrorist organizations, but they were doing cooperative, collective, taking care of their community work, and they were also targeted by the state. And so I think like, what are the ways that we also commit as communities and ecosystems to protecting and supporting cooperatives, and not just like, having this like idealistic, like we just need to love each other and have like peaceful relationships and believe in each other, but also like shift all of the mechanisms that make it really hard for co-ops to get like capital, make it really hard for people to work together, make it hard for people to start businesses. So many of the businesses that we work with take a really long time to like actually launch and get off the ground because people are working 2-3 jobs and like don't have money where they can just like, they don't have trust funds that can like seed their business. They don't have people in their life who can just like throw money at an experiment, because many businesses fail. Most businesses fail. Starting a business is very, very risky. And so to ask folks to do that who are already facing so many risks, we like something that's really important in our development model, and it can definitely be improved upon, is we're like, how do we give as much money as possible directly to the co-op? So we give them stipends when they're coming through our academy. We give each business like a small little grant to do whatever they want with it once they start, so they can choose to pay themselves for maybe some labor that like is unpaid, or they can decide to do whatever with it. But I think, how are we also giving resources and acknowledging that like it's also real material resources that is needed as well? Any other challenges you want to name?
I mean, I think you said it, like, like, when I first started Brooklyn Packers, I was doing other work, like it's hard to, I owned a dog walking business. At the same time, I was running the co-op, and I was doing I was doing the organizing business with my wife. Like, it's like these things patchwork of work that you put together to survive, to make money, and it's hard to develop a sound business in that time. You don't have a lot of energy, and just like human capacity, it catches up with you after a while, and you're just like, hey, like, is this working? I think a lot of people don't think it can work because it just takes a lot of your energy. Yeah. But I mean, those are all things that can go wrong, but some co-ops do work. Like my co-op is working right now. So, I want to talk about like, why do they work? As you develop co-ops that are still around, like what do you think it is that help them work?
Yeah, I think, thinking about the holistic approach that I was like, so many of the things that I was mentioning are like lessons learned. So, so supporting the individuals within the business. So like that's like conflict. How are we supporting folks through conflict, interpersonal conflict? How are we also giving folks like money, resources to actually put time and energy into like experimenting with these businesses? How are we working on like policy levels? One of the things that's nice about New York City that we're privileged to have is like city funding to like go towards co-ops. And so I think that that's like also real. And I think that supports the ecosystem. You said Hartford doesn't? Oh yeah. I mean that's a plug if anyone wants to do some policy organizing here locally. There's also, if you want to hear about the flip side of that, there's some challenges too when you're getting city and state money to like start co-ops. There's some really big challenges with that. But it nothing is perfect. But yeah, and I think the cooperation among cooperatives, so like that sort of ecosystem of like relationships are really everything. Relationships are the most valuable thing that we have. And so what are the relationships that exist that can support as like we're like growing and building. So all of those things, supporting the business, like technical assistance, supporting individuals, nurturing relationships, having material resources, and also having patience and like realistic expectations. Like this is really slow work. And oftentimes I think some of the conflict that emerges is like, real stuff is happening now. People need to eat now. And it's like there's always a tension in like pacing and so like how do we also allow space, because group work, moving together, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. Yeah.
Yeah, I talk a lot about the conditions that we are in to develop cooperatives and make businesses that are sustainable. But I even take it down to like, just on a personal level, the reason why I feel like Brooklyn Packers is probably mostly successful is because I have a personal ecosystem that supported me in being able to just be present with the business in a way that a lot of people don't. My partner is brilliant and is able to do, has a much higher earning level than I do. And so that was like one of the things. I had a pretty high earner working at the same time that I was developing a co-op, at home while we were raising children. And like those kind of support systems are like, I can't even say enough about that. And a lot of people don't have that. And also, like, in the way that New York City had been developing cooperatives is that, you get a whole bunch of people in a room that don't know each other and be like, what is a gap business that we need in our neighborhood? And people are like, this and that and cleaning, and then they're like, let's do that. And so, you have like strangers get together and they're like building a business together. And it's like, in retrospect, it's like crazy, it's like a crazy, it's like chaos, and that's a lot of reason why they didn't survive at that time. But I think now, we've learned a lot in that time, the way that Riseboro does it now, and I've seen some kind of evolution of the way that some other organizations have been doing it. CFNE is, doing its thing with the fellowship and doing some deep like learning, like how to do it better. And I think that's how we're gonna flip this over and get to a better place with it.
Cool. So we have time for a few questions. Oh, am I gonna hand it to you? I don't know what we're doing. I'm gonna just
Bring the mic around to people. Is there another mic or you'll share? Okay. So one of the things that first of all, can we clap? Thank you so much for sharing your absolute brilliance. The brilliance in this room is just overwhelming, and I'm in such awe. One of the things that really stresses me out when I'm at these spaces is the Q&A happens, and I'm like, I need a minute to just like think about what my question is. So I'm gonna play just a couple, like a minute of a song to give everybody a minute to think about what they want to ask, if you want to write it down. And then we'll come together and we'll move into the Q&A. And it'll give our lovely panelists a minute to take a breath and take a sip of their drinks. Okay. If you have a question, just go ahead and raise your hand, and I will come around with the mic. Fantastic. I see you. So I am prioritizing femmes first, and then we'll move over to gentlemen.
Thank you so much. And I don't know that it's really a question, but I love what really resonated for me was like this violence toward Black people building power. And, when it comes to trusting one another, I'd just love to hear you speak a little bit more to that, like, situations that have been dynamic or challenging toward you that you've really had to work through when it comes to building that power. Because I think that when you start to build power, then it's from the systems, but also from one another, that trust, when you're ready to level up and then someone breaks that trust with you, and then the power, is stifled. And I would just love to hear you speak a little bit more to that.
Well, economic power is political power. And, we can't forget that. And I think that we have to remember when we get that economic power which leads to the political power, it's like, how do we not recreate the thing that we are trying to fight against? And it's, capitalism is, the trappings of capitalism, is crazy. We're like tethered to it right now. But how do we, we see it in large cities. I see it like rampant in Atlanta, like the kind of the development of Atlanta, which is like a really Black city, like how it's like they fully have embraced capitalism in a way that is, that looks really attractive to Black people. It's a lot of has a lot of Black entrepreneurs, and more than any place that I've ever seen, really, concentrated in one place. So it's a really interesting place to see, like, kind of a young Black entrepreneurial kind of like demographic, and how that is happening while like they're trying to like build a whole cop city there. You know what I mean? It's like a weird kind of like thing. It's like, okay, now that you have economic power, how are you using that political power to like shut that down? Like, is it working? I don't know. But I think it's like it's an interesting kind of like thing to see and to recognize, like, how do we wield power when we get it as Black people? What do we do with it? And how can we do it differently? How can we not like recreate something that will destroy us?
Yeah, I think this is a very great question, and I think that a lot of it really starts on like a small micro level. I think there's like ways that we see power functioning all the time. That's like power over, and I think even with conversations like, okay, this person within your co-op or collective did this thing that was like hurtful or like impacted folks in a particular way, and like you get to decide what happens, and like in a way where you're also committed to caring about this person. And so I think it's like reminding people of their options, and like the agency to leave, the agency to like confront someone. It's like, oh, you did this thing and it like impacted me in this way, and like building like those practices in small ways. I think so much of it is like actually like, how are we practicing these things in small ways and everyday ways, so that when the big moments happen, that it doesn't feel overwhelming or intimidating. And I think for people to actually, especially in like moments of like conflict, and like harm or rupture to like actually decide what happens, because we're used to the state coming in and telling us what needs to happen or like telling us what should happen. But I think, dang, I'm talking a lot about conflict today, but it's a big part of the work. Honestly, I feel like the power that I've seen has like really come in hard moments. Like, it's good to feel powerful when you're, I mean, it's also nice to like make your own money and then decide like that you're gonna pay yourself or to like hire people, and that feels really really good to like make those sorts of decisions and to like actually vote for people who have like never have only been employees, and to like make a decision around like, oh, we like made like extra money, and so we get to decide like how to spend this money. Like, that's empowering. And also like, oh, I'm a part of this decision. This like really hard thing happened, and like I actually am a part of the decision around like what happens. I think that, yeah, those are instances of like practicing like what it feels like and like what it actually means to be empowered. Yeah.
Thank you. What are three key values and praxis for co-op developers to build from the bottom up that we want to elevate in our cooperative ecosystem?
Values, I'm sorry. Um, well, I think part of it is that we have to remember that we get to do this. You know, this is the choice that we make every day, whether or not we want to do this. But you know, I think the framing of like, oh, we have to do this, where it's like, no, we get to do this. You know, this is like a privilege for a lot of us to be able to be here and do this work. And so I like value like, you know, this is a joy for me actually. Like doing this work it makes me really happy to be able to do it. So we have to value like the joy, you know, the joy in it. Like, we talk a lot about conflict and, you know, the hard times, but we keep doing it, you know, like I keep doing it, because ultimately this is the thing that makes me happy. And love, you know, it's like, this is hard work. Like I don't think anybody does this to make money really. Like we can make money other ways, you know, but we do want to make money in ways that are not extractive. And I think, you know, we're like having a business that you're able to like engage with folks in a way that is regenerative and allows you to be humans. You don't find that in a lot of other ways that businesses are run, or maybe none, you know. So I'm actively caring for the people in my work. I'm actively caring for people in my work every day. I'm able to do that. I get to do that. And I think the frameworks, I think we do have to just think about, you know, where we were as a co-op ecosystem 10 years ago and where we are now. And like, what are we looking for the next 10 years to be? I think it is around conflict evolution. I think it is about like more intentional strategy actually. And I think it's about ecosystems agreeing on what the plan is. Because a lot of times we're off in our own little kind of like, you know, Connecticut does it in this way, New York does it in this way, and that's appropriate in some cases. But I think there are some kind of through lines that could work for everybody. I think we need to talk more. I love conferences because we get to, you know, exchange ideas and see what everybody else is doing. And I think there has to be a platform of like learning, which is why I really liked Sarah, the co-op, information co-op. Like I really love that idea because I was like, oh, that's like a way that we can learn from each other in a way that's tangible and accessible. So, yeah, I think those are important right now.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to like put it in words, but so in a lot of co-op developer, so I'm a co-op developer. I was a part of a worker co-op that didn't really survive. That's a story for another time. But I work for a nonprofit that pays me a salary to support the development of worker co-ops, and that's like a pretty common like model in this country, and like I think one of the things for me that's important that we've like grappled with and are constantly grappling with is like I get paid a salary to support folks in starting these businesses, and so there's like class difference. I think that like this work is like should be like rooted in like class consciousness and like really working class struggle, and I think that is important. Like acknowledging power dynamics all of the time in all of the ways is really important, and like is a value in this work that I think definitely needs to happen. And then also on like funding levels, like there are funders who hold a lot of power in like how things are done, and so much of the reason why we do co-op and solidarity economy work is like actually to support and uplift people's self-determination. But there's so many structures like the ways that nonprofits function, the ways that money flows that actually inhibit self-determination. And so like what are the ways that we're actually like really centering that and trying to break down those barriers. And then I think kind of relatedly is that like co-op work really isn't about just starting businesses, and I think it can be really easy to do that, to think about it in that way as like another form of business development. But it's really like what are the ways that this is infused in every aspect of our lives, and so how are we sharing power in other realms of our life, in our relationships, in our communities? Like how are we relying on each other? How are we like really trying to like undo those toxic hierarchies? This understanding that like power must mean power over in our relationships with our children, in our relationships in schools. Like what are the ways that we are living like the values outside of just an economic or business development standpoint, but like actually like how we relate to each other. So much of this work is like actually just how we're building relationships and relating to each other, relating to the land. And so I think, applying it beyond like just starting co-op businesses, but like actually how we exist and live alongside each other.
So before we take our last question from in the room, is there anyone in the... No? Okay, fantastic. So you get to give us the last question.
Thank you. I know you say you might touch on this another time, but just maybe a thought. Steph, you mentioned that it might not be the right time for your co-op. And so whether y'all have been a participant in this or just kind of witnessed, what kind of aftercare do you think is necessary if a co-op is disbanded, and the thought of maybe returning assets in an equitable way to members? If like in that aftercare, is there like a part that you think about returning assets to members?
I don't know. I haven't thought about that. But I mean, yeah, it is important. We finished our, because we're an LLC cooperative, we finished our operating agreement this year, a new one. And it's in our governance. We give it back. We give back the equity that they've built in the company over the years, which is like a nominal amount. That's the simplest way I can put it. But I don't I mean, it's hard because, people put a lot of work into a co-op. It's like, uh, my co-op is almost 9 years old, so when I leave, I will get about $4,000, according to our operating agreement. I have definitely put more than $4,000 worth of work into this co-op, but that's what it is, and yeah, I don't know. Like I think that shows you it's like not about the money, you know.
Yeah, so there's like the operating agreement that Steph is referring to is like if you are creating a co-op and you're agreeing, it's basically a legal document that says we agree to run our business this particular way, and usually in there you will have an agreement around how you will handle distribution of assets if and when someone leaves. And so hopefully that document exists. For a lot of co-ops, it doesn't, though. I've definitely helped co-ops, a couple of co-ops transition that kind of fell apart or dissolved before they were able to get their operating agreement together, because that's like a long legal process that can take a really long time. And so what that has been having a lot of really tough conversations with people who are tight, like angry, upset, and like trying to get folks to. So I think a lot of the times what the process is like trying to talk about what happened. Some of the things that I appreciate most are like when co-ops dissolve or disband, like, and there's been a level of like assessment or like healing or repair that's happened, like kind of like sharing what happened. And then having folks like come to the table if whoever's willing and ready, and like make one final like democratic decision around like what do you do if that document, if there isn't a document that exists that tells you what to do, which is nice. Which is why it's nice to have those documents that kind of decide that, because getting people who are like upset and like angry and to make decisions around money when there isn't a document that exists is really hard. It's like very, very hard. And yeah, I've seen people who love each other and care about each other, but who have felt burned when it comes to having those meetings. Sometimes you can't even have that conversation for a while because you have to do the like nurturing stuff first. And so I think one of the things that's nice is to have the support of like an outside agency or entity that like I think Brooklyn Packers has, we can support with that, and we're folks who have like relationships with them and can do that. Not everyone has that, but reality is a lot of businesses fail, a lot of co-ops fail, and a lot of the time the heartbreak around that is like really, really big. And so I think it's also important to like kind of prepare for that as much as possible in the beginning. But if you have more specific questions around that, I'd also be down to talk to you after. Is that it? Okay, sorry y'all, that's it.